ask people to find their way here. Where's the okay. Don't worry. Okay, so as you see, we could just go on and on, giving you beautiful examples from all over the planet. But I would ask our technicians to bring this presentation to an end and just go to the actual presentation of our meeting this afternoon. And a warm welcome to all of you. Welcome to COP23. Let's do our best to make this a valuable part of the process around climate change, adaptation and mitigation, working together to create a beautiful planet for future generations. And thank you for being here today as part of this particular session. My name is Kosha Joubert. I'm originally from South Africa, and I've lived in several countries. I currently live in Scotland, and I think the experience of apartheid in South Africa and then finding a community within South Africa that was actually where black and white people were actually living together under apartheid, and realizing that in communities we can create the realities that we're dreaming of, that we want to see, without fighting the existing situation. really brought me on this path with eco-villages, communities around the planet, and seeing how community-led development can be a core part if we want to create true change. So we want to share today with you in this session called Developing Ecovillages for Regeneration and Climate Action, Opportunities for Europe, inspired by Asia, Africa, and Latin America. You'll hear some inspiration from different parts of the world, but we'll start just with a brief overview of what GEN is and what ecovillages are. So I work as the executive director of the global part of this network. And the special thing is that on every level of our organization, we really have the different voices of the different continents being heard and being in deep conversation with each other. I notice the sound has just changed. It's become quite echoey up front, but you're fine. You can understand. Great. So we'd like to bring this question to you, and I'm not sure whether we have a microphone around here, but I'd love to hear from you just what are the first thoughts that come to you when you hear eco-village? What is an eco-village? What do you think of when you hear the word eco-village? Community, yes. What else? Harmony. Beautiful. Definitely something we strive for. Anything else? Health. Permaculture, true. You all know what you're speaking about. Yeah, we've even, one of the kind of synonyms we use for ecovillages is intentional communities. And another synonym we sometimes use is healing biotopes. So I think all of that was very poignant and in the right direction. So this is the definition that we currently use in the Global Ecovillage Network. A community using participatory design processes to integrate the ecological, economic, social, and cultural dimensions of sustainability into a whole systems pathway towards a regenerative future. And I just want to point a few aspects of this definition. One is the participatory design process. So one core aspect of Ecovillage, and this especially came up when around 10 years ago we had more and more traditional villages, existing communities in the global south, indigenous villages and communities saying, we want to be recognized as ecovillages as well. And we found, we asked ourselves, what is the main difference between any community, any urban neighborhood, and an ecovillage? And we realized the main difference is that there's a group of people coming together saying, we're not going to allow our reality, our future, to be shaped by outside pressures only. We want to come together and think together, what is it that we want to be together as a community? The other point is that wherever a community starts, so we have ecovillages in the Global Ecovillage Network that start from an ecological starting point, that say, what we want to do is lower our carbon footprint, and we want to do this in a radical way. We want to show ways that haven't been tried before. I lived in an ecovillage here in Germany called the Ecovillage of Siebenlinden that have lowered their carbon footprint to 30% of the German average of a similar village. And this is radical, but what we find is whether a community starts from ecology or they start from spirituality or culture. Currently, I live in an ecovillage in Scotland called Findhorn, which started from you could call it a spiritual root of saying we can work so closely with the unseen forces and with the energies of nature around us that we can create harmony with these powers around us. So Other communities really start from peace building. They work in areas like in Colombia, we have the peace communities where people come together and really start in a conflict situation, and their starting point is peace. But wherever they start, we find that as the eco-villages develop and mature, they become holistic. They engage with all 4 dimensions of sustainability and bring that together into a whole systems design. So we also see that eco-villages and intentional communities of this kind naturally become local implementation hubs for the SDGs. And lastly, we have the regenerative future. So 20 years ago in the Global Ecovillage Network, we were speaking about sustainability and the importance of sustainability. And today we know that we have already destroyed so much of the resources around us that today it's not enough to be sustainable. And we need to learn as human communities that we can actually heal and regenerate the systems that we are a part of. So we work a lot with communities in rural areas, but we also work with communities in urban centers. We see the importance of bringing nature and also bringing community back to cities. And we also work a lot with newly formed communities where currently, for instance, we're starting to work in refugee camps or people who have been displaced by natural disasters. So eco-villages take place in quite different frameworks around the world. And this is a core sentence: Ecovillage is a process, not an outcome. We work with Ecovillage principles. For instance, one of them is 100% renewable energies, but we realize that most of the communities we work with, many of them haven't attained that yet, but they're on the way. And we support each other in this global network of around 10,000 communities that we reach out to. We support each other in the sharing of best practice to keep aiming for higher ways of going. So what we see, this is just an example, again, from Europe, this is an example from Portugal, is that eco-villages truly transform their environments. This is an example from an area in Portugal that is becoming more and more drought-stricken. The climate is changing rapidly. Many of you will have heard of the many fires that raged through Portugal this summer. And this is natural, organic-made lakes, which completely change the climate in that area, also allow for local food production and a local community to flourish, and it actually changes the local climate. And now there's an interest to spread this kind of water retention landscape to that whole area in Portugal. But again, this is only one example. For instance, in again, the eco-village of Siemlinnen, which lies in Saxon-Anhalt, is the only village in that whole county which is actually growing in population, which has a high amount of kids, children, which integrates elders and children living together, and which has a heightened employment rate. So different communities work in different ways, but over time they all become whole systems, and they all start inspiring their regions. Sometimes we speak about the yogurt culture of eco-village lifestyles, where the milk of the culture around them starts being curdled, slowly but surely. And we find that in many of the older eco-villages, the whole regions around them start transforming. Yeah, so just briefly, GEN was set up in 1995. We've had consultative status with the UN ever since then. And we are currently reaching out to around 10,000 communities worldwide. And we have these brilliant regional networks around the planet where we truly learn from one another. We build solidarity with one another. It's quite sad today that both our speaker from Cameroon, Sonita Mba, who was meant to be here, didn't receive her visa in time. We're still struggling for her to get her visa. Our speaker from Latin America, Margarita Zetelius, also could not make it in time due to the difficulties with logistics, visa, flight. She will be arriving in 2 days. But we do have our speakers from Asia, from Europe, and Yvette, who will be speaking for Gen Africa. I'll introduce them a bit more later here. So you'll get a very good impression of the different areas. And just as we speak across the world, I think this is one of the amazing things being in this role, working with the Global Ecovillage Network, is that climate change is not something distant to us. We hear on a daily basis of our friends, our communities in Bangladesh that are being flooded, in the Philippines that have been hit by the next hurricane, in Mexico that have been hit by an earthquake, in Zimbabwe that have been hit by a drought, and it goes on and on. So it's a really felt experience, and it's our friends that are hit by climate change. So we work together, and there's a mutual respect because we know that we're walking our talk. We're not just speaking about great ambitions, but we're actually implementing as we walk. So I will leave it there for now, and we will continue with Brigitta Spälti, who is our Gen Europe ambassador. She's from Switzerland. She's also the president of the Swiss Ecovillage Network, and I wish you lots of joy and inspiration in listening to Brigitta.
Well, thank you, Kosha. I also warmly welcome you this afternoon. I'm happy to be here, to be able to do this presentation for you. But I also apologize because Robert Hall, who was actually meant to hold this presentation, was not able to come today, so I will do my best on his place. As you heard, my name is Brigitta Spälti. I'm from the Global Ecovillage Network Switzerland, and I'm representing Gen Europe today. Climate change is real. We all know it, that climate change is happening now. Thank you. We certainly did not expect that climate change will happen so quickly and in such a heavy way. So now many people feel kind of overwhelmed seeing or experiencing the heavy effects it has. As also Kosha was telling around the world, everything was happening. So global warming, we all heard about it, we all know it. There is these big forest fires. Also, we heard about from Portugal, from Spain, dried soils, which supports erosion. There are heavy storms and floods all around the world. We know about that. There are the melting glaciers, and just 2 days ago, actually, I read this in the newspaper. It's in German, but I will translate somehow. That glaciers in Greenland, for example, are melting quite faster than they expected, and they even say that 2 or 4 times as many glaciers are in danger than they expected before. So this is also a cause where the sea level is rising, and we get lots of floods and storms and tsunamis. Well, we might sometimes think that this is already too late to do something, or that if I do something by my own, maybe it won't have any impact. But let's see, what if a lot of individuals or groups are doing a lot against climate change or to support a positive climate change? What if there are already a lot of groups and movements supporting this climate-supportive lifestyle? in Europe. There are many grassroots movements working on a way towards a sustainable lifestyle since years. This is also real. The European network is one of them. In 1995, I had a vision about a huge place with a lot of people living in a sustainable and peaceful way. I saw a lot of varieties of ecological buildings, etc., etc. And years later, I got to know that, as Kosha said, in 1995, the Global Ecovillage Network was founded. So, what is the way towards a sustainable climate and climate-supportive lifestyle? In a, yes, well, it doesn't matter. In ecovillages. Well, lots of people are searching for different ways of life, or searching for ways of life in a sustainable way. They get together and build ecovillages, or go to already existing ecovillages to learn about. So there are a lot of ecovillages in Europe, in over 26 countries, and there are 14 national networks connected to the GEN national network, the GEN network in Europe. Ecovillages are models of solutions for global problems like climate change. People are living on a place, they share the place, they share materials, so that we don't have to produce and produce always more. But actually we support degrowth. People develop new ways of using renewable energy instead of wasting the resources of Mother Earth. So they're creating biogas, they're working with solar panels, like here we see the earthship house from Tempelhof, Schloss Tempelhof in Germany. This house actually has been made out of a lot of recycling material, like bottles or old wheels of cars, etc. And actually it's quite an interesting building. And there are also, as Kosha already told, in Tamera, water retention system, so that the dried landscape can be can turn out in a really big variety of plants and in abundance. Living in an ecovillage is a way to reconnect with our living sources, and this lets us automatically live in a climate-supportive way. European ecovillages are models of sustainable production and consumption and resilience. So in Europe, there is another movement in the network where people are going to places which are depopulated. There's a lot of spaces in Europe, like in Slovenia, for example, or in Switzerland, or in other places where villages are abandoned. And so there are whole valleys just without people and without life. So a lot of people are going to these places, rebuilding and repopulate these areas. I was once in Slovenia to one of these places, and this is Park Istra. There were just 4 people living anymore, just 4 people left from the ancient community. And these people rebuilt, the new people coming there, rebuilt these buildings and restarted a community there. So you see these new buildings and the people living there now. This happens in different places over Europe. But many people think that living in a sustainable way or in an eco-village means that we have to live in a sort of poor way, which, when I look at eco-villages, I don't see that. I see an immense richness. We live on really awesome places in a sustainable way and care about them, like here in Switzerland in the Center of Unity. Or we have the Permaculture gardens, which brings us a lot of fruits, vegetables, flowers, herbs, whatever we need. We are sharing a lot of things, knowledge, best practice within the Ecovillage or the network. And people are not isolated like in urban areas sometimes, where they live alone in their little apartment and don't really have a good connection to other people. And isn't it great being connected to renewable energy and knowing that these sources will not end tomorrow? There is another project also in Europe. This is the twin ship between South and North. Here in the example of Guedes Chantier from Senegal and Damanhur of Italy, where they exchange actually the knowledge and the best practice of ecovillages and also of the culture. And finally, get good friends. Living in an ecovillage brings a new way of abundance on several levels, while having a strongly positive impact on climate change. So let's make a real impact on climate change together. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Brigitta. And we're going to move back to the original presentation, please. And also we're moving on from Gen Europe, which has been making these inspiring steps. There was actually just a study that was done. We can give you the information on that. Sorry, it's the second presentation that we go back to. Which was done by scientists here in Europe, showing that if only 5% of Europe would follow this kind of community-led development, that 80% of Europe's 2020 goals in carbon drawdown would be met. So it really doesn't need a huge amount of the population to make a very, very relevant impact. And we can share more about that with you later. So I think what we've found in Europe is that the European ecovillages have actually learned a lot from our partners in the other parts of the world. From Africa, the level of solidarity and community hospitality that is lived in Africa. In Latin America, the pure creativity and radicality of people. And from Asia, I would say especially the depth of culture and that people bring to the table. So I'm really glad that we're continuing now with hearing from Asia, and we'll turn to Sarah Queblatin, who's from the Philippines. Her life has been deeply touched by the experience of just how vulnerable the communities in the Philippines are. All of you will know that hurricanes have regularly hit the Philippines. At the moment, there's civil unrest, which doesn't help in the situation, but Sarah has firsthand experienced what this is like for the people in those places and the trauma that these experiences cause. She has been part of processes to rebuild. She's one of the people in Gen who works very strongly with our emergency program, which is rebuilding communities after disaster. And she's also just founded her own NGO called Green Relief. And let's hear from Sarah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Kosha. It's really an honor to be here at the COP again to share about our experiences in the region and also learn together with the other regions. So I represent the Oceania and Asia region of GEN, but I don't think this is the slideshow.
Can we just go back to the slideshow 2?
The slideshow
slide
number
15.
15.
Thank you.
The number 4, I think he created a new slideshow.
We love these pictures too. And this is Sri Lanka, so we're right there in Asia.
Yes,
But it's still not exactly.
Yeah, a little bit, I guess, before like Kosha said, I was working with disaster communities, and that's what actually motivated me to work with GEN, because many of the solutions that we've been seeing after disasters are mostly fragmented, and the Ecovillage solutions have a whole system designed to it that really helps support communities move from survivors into thrivers, and we see firsthand how many of solutions that GEN offers, can offer that. So I see my slideshow here. So let me see this one. Okay. So in the next.
It's the green one.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Thank you. So yeah, in Oceania and Asia, so Oceania is mainly the Pacific Islands, no? If just to give some background to that, we are a varied network, so many of us are organizations. There's around 8 major organizations that compose us. There are around 12 intentional communities, 20 ecotourism projects, 17 learning centers, 21 permaculture projects, 28 ecovillages, 2 food forest projects, 1 eco-town, which we'll describe about later, and 5 national networks. And it is growing and growing. And Genoa is, as many of you know, many low-lying islands are also in the region. So the plight, like with the Fiji COP presidency and the island nations are calling for us also about how we could thrive in this kind of condition. Many of the nations are also climate vulnerable, flood and hurricanes and droughts going on around the region. And Asia and Oceania are at the crossroads of modernity and industrialization, because many of the rise of economic growth of some of Asian countries and our traditional cultures and values and beliefs are also, on the line between this. It's a crossroad between those, the growth and keeping our values alive. So I'll give you a little bit of some stories from the region. Some examples, no? I don't know if you're familiar with Auroville in India. So I see someone nodding there. So it's an eco-town and was actually given status by UNESCO as one of the contributors to the future of humanity. There's around 50,000 plus residents here, and it started as an experimental town and village to see, how people can live in harmony with, the ideals of, equality and earth care together. And Auroville is also really modeling a good forestry program, really helping, in carbon sinking and also restoring ecosystems, providing food security and livelihood. Another part of India is we see some support for indigenous communities in Odisha. So where, women, particularly women, indigenous leaders are actually empowered to, support seed saving in their communities and promote organic agriculture. And they even fight against GMOs in their communities, and they're on the streets and they're teaching eco-village design. So it's really empowering to see how, how indigenous ways and wisdom in eco-village design is integrated and very natural to the design process of eco-village design, because by nature, indigenous ways are very connected to a whole system. In the Philippines where I work, so we're working with different indigenous cultures or traditional cultures and honoring their cultural and natural heritage, and then using that to help inform the ecosystem restoration practices. So I, like, for example, I work in a province affected by a typhoon, and where, you know, many of their forests are gone already before the typhoons hit. It's because of growing corn feeds. They've burned their forests to grow quick producing products, but then in exchange they also have other disasters like health risks because of GMO sprays. And then that on another level is how to also regenerate livelihoods while regenerating ecosystems. So this is a project that we're doing with the local government and the Department of Education, and with the support of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources and other interagency support. We're hoping to model an eco-village as a way to inspire other indigenous communities to go on the same pathway. In Sri Lanka, a village is also modeling waste management, and it's already presenting to the local government for scaling. And yeah, Sri Lanka is, you know, many of the initiatives there are also youth-led. They're engaging young people. They're also in the social enterprise arena. They're also supporting local food, local economy, and so small scale but very network supported initiatives. In Bangladesh, they're modeling like 54 eco-villages, and many of them are really disaster resilient models using permaculture solutions to prevent or adapt to flooding and hurricanes. And then currently they're also preparing to respond to the Rohingya crisis. So many of the Rohingya refugees have fled to Bangladesh, and now we're preparing to support how they could assist the refugees. In Thailand, sorry that the formatting changed. So many, they're developing this leadership program based on the Buddhist principles. And, you know, they also work with local governments, and they also work with Buddhist leaders. So it's a beautiful mix of how, you know, our spirituality and our political or economic and social leadership come into play. In the region, we also work among ourselves, between countries or between sub-regions. So we also have regular dialogues where we learn from each other and where are we going. And so in that conversation, we deepen our work and expand and build communities of practice. So this is the snapshot of the region, and I hope it would help piece together the next few parts of the next pieces that we will share about eco-villages around the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And from Asia, we just want to maybe just go one back, just, can you do? Yeah, so just to remind just for a moment that our very dear friend Margarita Tzelius couldn't be here. So in line with what, and building on what Sarah has just shared from Asia, in Latin America, again, we have a very strong network all over Latin America of local communities, eco-villages, permaculture projects, transition town initiatives. It's all brought together in the network of CASA. My house is your house. It's communities that are sustainable, so it's the Sustainable Communities Network of Latin America. And they've also engaged very deeply at the moment in disaster relief work, especially in Ecuador, in Chile and Colombia. So after earthquakes, also after the mudslides in Colombia, and right now starting the rebuilding after the earthquake in Mexico. In all these moments of disaster, which are hitting more and more frequently, we have a choice how to rebuild. Are we going to do a quick solution with cement buildings? Are we going to bring in quick aid from the outside? Or are we going to be working with the local communities, with the local designs, with green architecture, with local food sources, actually strengthen local agriculture, strengthening local employment also? So this is what we're doing with Ecovillage strategies at the moment in Mexico. And we have several national networks in Latin America and also growing, and you can find more information about all of this on the GEN website. And afterwards also, if you come here, we have some flyers and we're really happy to share with you. But right now we're going to continue and we're going to go to learn about Africa. And Yvette Dzakpasu is here. I do hope I say that name about. We never call each other by our last names. But Yvette is an incredibly welcome new member to our GEN International team. She works as our new advocacy director. Yeah, and she has a background with the law. So she studied law at Columbia University, and she's using law to work towards sustainable peace and support local communities in keeping ownership over their own development. She worked for the past years for the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, WILPF. So you also see we have a very female panel today. We are actually very much 50-50, but for some reason the men didn't quite make it over in time. But we do also have a very strong women's support network within GEN. And currently Yvette is working in Ghana as legal counsel at Advocates for Community Alternatives. So she's actually working with communities on the ground in Ghana who are under threat by mining companies moving in. And this is also just an example of what is happening the world over. So I'm delighted to pass on to Yvette, who will share a bit about the African networks and also about how we can work with law to support the rights of communities.
Thank you, Kosha, for that very, very lovely introduction. It's usually something that I'm working towards, to have more women's voices being heard, more women on panels. So I'm very happy that we have this 100% women panel today. But of course, very grateful for all of the wonderful male colleagues in our network as well. So today I'm going to talk about GEN Africa and the examples and work that we're doing within the Ecovillage network in the region. But before I begin, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge Sonita, who Kosha mentioned at the beginning. Sonita is a wonderful young woman from Cameroon. She is the executive secretary of GEN Africa, and she represents the youth wing, which is called Next Gen within GEN Africa. She's based in Cameroon. She's a facilitator, a trainer. She works at an organization called Better World Cameroon. And if you've got one of our little flyers that we were giving out today, you will see she was meant to be giving this talk today, but unfortunately she couldn't be here because of visa reasons. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge Sonita, and yeah, hopefully she'll be with us very soon, getting over from Cameroon. So before diving into some examples from the region, I want to throw out a question to each of you. So like Kosha said, currently I'm working in Ghana with communities. We do legal rights training, advocacy support, kind of representation in courts and in other arbitration bodies. And the main thing that I take from this is when speaking with communities, it's always best to listen to them and for them to speak and to hear their voices. And here, we're in something of a community. So I have a question for each of you, and what I would like is for you to turn to the person next to you, just introduce yourself, say your name, where you're from, and 30 seconds on what community means to you. So I'm gonna give you a minute to do that, and then we'll come back and hear some of your thoughts. Don't be shy. Yeah, pick it up. Okay, I'm very happy to see you're all deeply engaged in conversation. This is really wonderful. We're going to bring it back now and just hear a few of you, some of the voices. What does community mean to you? If we've got a mic going around, if you just want to raise your hand. Yeah. So we have up here.
A group of people working together with common ambitions to achieve those ambitions.
Common ambitions. Thank you. A couple of others. Okay.
That sounds a bit like COP23.
A group of people that shares their values and is also open to people from outside and aware of their own process, but aware of the processes that are happening around the world.
That's lovely, thank you. And let's have one more. Come over here.
For me, community means to identify problem together and to resolve problem together.
Thank you. So from these, and I'm sure there are many more examples, we can take away common ambitions, shared values, and problem solving together. I think we can all agree that this really is the heart of what it means to be in community. And part of this exercise is just to illustrate how once we share voices and we start speaking with each other, we even feel more community amongst one another. So at the heart of the work of Gen Africa is community. And sometimes in this kind of work, you'll hear development, development aid, development work, but we will always refer to community, community-led development, community-led change. And why do we focus on this? Well, there's no shortage of solutions that are proposed by experts, by people who are leaders and researchers in their fields, but a lot of the time, the people at the heart of the concerns that we're looking at, who are the communities themselves, are not necessarily heard or listened to. And what we are really, really keen to do within Gen Africa and the Ecovillage network around the world as a whole is to put communities at the heart of the solutions that we're looking at. So before giving some examples of some of the work that's being done in Gen Africa, I just want to touch on what are the challenges that the continent is facing right now. So these are common things that I'm sure all of you will have heard of. Rural flight. Brigitta spoke about this in the context of Europe, where people have left rural populations, rural villages, and moved into the cities, and now they're starting to move back. In Africa, the move is still very much in the other direction. People leaving their farms, their villages, and heading into the cities looking for work, looking for a better opportunity. This means that the traditional farming methods and practices that would have been done by thousands of people during thousands of years are no longer being done, which leads to questions around food security, diversity of crops, what people can grow, how much can grow, and how do we manage this balance between those in the rural parts of countries and those moving into urban areas. An issue that I work on is land rights. There is a real tension and question right now, especially in West Africa, where I focus on community rights, communities having access and ownership, a real deep connection to the land that they've lived on, worked on, that has been their home for generations, versus large-scale development coming in from mining companies, from big development projects that are being done. And we see this challenge between respecting and securing the rights of people versus balancing this with the economic development of a country. So Africa is rich. This is something that I think people don't say enough. Africa is rich in culture, in people, in community, in food, in resources. It's a rich continent. The people are rich. the communities that I work with are incredibly rich. But what we see is the richness of the land doesn't find its way into the homes and the hearts and the pockets of the people themselves. So in my work in Ghana, where we're trying to represent communities who are fighting against mining companies, in other parts of West Africa, it might be development companies building large constructions, taking up land that is meant for agriculture, meant to provide food security, that is actually now being developed and, you know, funds moving outside of Africa, which is angering, frustrating, and sad. So these are a couple of the challenges. And then within legislation in different parts of the continent, you'll see a real imbalance in the small farmer who just wants to work on the land, you know, the subsistence farmer who wants to grow food for his family or for her family. Many rural farmers are actually women. But there is legislation in place which makes it really difficult for this to happen. Licensing fees are really high, taxes have to be paid, land taxes. So this puts that individual at a really low bargaining position compared with, you know, the bigger structures that they're up against. So what can we do about this? This is the hopeful part of this short talk. There are so many examples of wonderful things that are being done throughout Africa. In Ghana, in Kumasi, which is just up in heading towards the central part of the country, we have the Kumasi Institute of Tropical Agriculture. This is a school, a training ground for young people to learn about agriculture, organic farming methods, permaculture, and we have young people from the area who wouldn't necessarily choose to go into agriculture. They would be part of this rural flight, wanting to move into the city, choosing actually to stay and work on the land, learn different methods that can make it not just sustainable, but regenerative for them to maintain the rural connection that they have. And this is me in one of the greenhouses. We say greenhouse, but I mean, it's hot, whether you're inside or outside. So I don't think greenhouse is quite the right term. But within the KITA, the Kumasi Institute of Tropical Agriculture Center, they have these wonderful, innovative ways of protecting, growing different types of crops and plants, regardless of the weather. You know, the seasons are changing, the dry season, the rainy season, it's not as it used to be. So these methods that the students are being taught really helps promote food security in that region. Another example takes us from Ghana through to the Gambia, where we have Kartong Ecovillage, which is the home of, or close to, Sandele Eco Retreat and Learning Center. This is the hub of the Ecovillage movement in the Gambia. Sandele Foundation is a non-profit organization which has an eco-hotel, you know, for ecotourism, people can come and stay, but also a training center for people in the region to learn about ecovillages, about alternative agricultural methods, and it's really a living demonstration center where people can learn different technologies while also offering this ecotourism to guests that come. And just to make us feel very jealous as we're here in sunny Bonn, this is a picture of the beach over in Kartong, where the Ecovillage is. And there are a number of different villages in this region, so it's not just the Gambia, it crosses over into Senegal as well. And they form the People's Coast Ecovillage Network. They band together to learn from each other, to strengthen one another, both in terms of the practices that are employed, but also with issues that come up. One of my cases, which I won't go into too much detail of, is concerning one of the villages in this network of ecovillages, kind of trying to fight against the extractive industries once again. And then the final example that I just want to quickly touch on is GBIAC in Kenya. So GBIAC stands for Grow Bio-Intensive Agriculture Center Kenya. And they demonstrate, train, and promote this different agricultural method, Grow Bio-Intensive, and other appropriate community development techniques for sustainable or regenerative development amongst small-scale farmers. Their work encompasses food security, the environment, and also women's empowerment. And you can see the top photo there is the Women's Center. And I'd just like to close with a little quote. If one person dreams alone, it remains a dream. If many start dreaming together, it is the beginning of a new reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yvette. Thank you for that inspiration from Africa. And there's so much more happening on the ground. What you're receiving here is just a minute taste. And I see quite a few of you taking notes very studiously. We do find, actually, that it's especially the young generation that is currently very, very interested in eco-village development. And I just want to say to everyone who's here, we have two wonderful interns at the moment, Fanny and Esther. Maybe you can just raise your hands. They're here. And if you're interested, because we've just developed all these very, very beautiful brochures about the different eco-village development programs, I'm going to introduce a bit of it to you in a moment, but also about Gen Education, Gen Consultancy, the Eco-Village Impact Assessment. So there's a lot more materials that we have. And if you would like, we have a list here that you, at the end of our event, you can just come around, write down your email, and we can send you all this information as very simple electronic brochures, just because I see the interest here. So, yeah, growing from this, what I want to speak about just a little bit more, and then we'll open up for questions, is so where from here? We have all these wonderful projects on the ground, creating inspiring hubs, demonstration centers, curdling the milk, if you remember, the yogurt culture, curdling the milk around them. 20 years ago, we were using the terms. Now everybody uses the terms that we used 20 years ago. You know, so, and we're part of a much bigger movement for community-led change, where we believe that really it's the people who have the good intentions, who really want to be part of the solutions. And we're saying to governments at the moment around the world that actually, if you integrate your communities and you work with your population every step of the way, and you don't just put your thought into top-down developments, but you really bring it together with these kind of bottom-up led developments. This is where we can really start implementing the promise of the SDGs and the climate change agreements. At the moment, we know that the reality of what is being implemented and the Paris Climate Agreement, that there's a very significant gap. And we can be part of bridging that gap. So this is what the Global Ecovillage Network does. We bring together the information, the inspiration of all these communities around the world, and we start working with academia, for instance, to do research. What is the actual impact? We network them for better exchange. We have a solution library online where communities can upload their best and most effective solutions. And we start working with corporations like, I'm not doing advertisement here, but the Lush company has been, just as an example, has been supporting several of our initiatives on the ground to create organic resources, but also to have a steady income. We know that eco-village development cannot be a weekend hobby. We need to find ways to give people the opportunity to bring together their love for the planet and their need to make a living. So we work with corporations. We work, of course, with the United Nations, but we're also starting to work directly with governments, and that's part of why we're here at COP23. And I just want to share a little bit about that. So we know that eco-villages can implement solutions on the ground, and any community that really takes the decision can be part of this. So we have developed 5 different programs that we focus on, really saying that every community around the world needs to become an eco-community, and every city around the world needs to become a green city. So we need to work together to make that happen. It really means that every person in the world needs to get involved in this. So the first program is Ecovillage incubation. We, just as an example, for instance, in Denmark, we currently have 70 ecovillages, but we also have 40 ecovillage initiatives, new groups of people that are wanting to start ecovillages. And we see that where 15 years ago, ecovillages had to really fight and be extremely committed to find a municipality that wanted to house their Ecovillage initiative. Today, we have municipalities wanting Ecovillage initiatives to join them because they can see and they can measure the benefits that Ecovillages have on their municipalities. Then we have the Ecovillage Development Program, and this is a program that was deeply inspired by Senegal, where Jen worked in a small network of around 40 communities on the ground, a local Ecovillage network. And the government of Senegal realized that something was happening in these communities that they weren't able to replicate elsewhere, even with more development aid, which was this local empowerment, people really feeling like they're owning the processes. So the government of Senegal set up a national program to transition 14,000 traditional villages to ecovillages. They're now 6 years, 7 years into the program. So far, I believe they've transitioned around 500, so they've still got a long way to go. But we're meeting with the Minister of Environment from Senegal, and we really salute the Senegalese government for starting this program. And it's been spreading. So we now have the government in Zimbabwe that has signed up to a national Ecovillage development program, transitioning communities. We have the government of Burkina Faso that has committed to 2,000 ecovillages by 2020. And we met with 23 governments in total who are concretely interested in bringing ecovillage development programs to their country. The Prime Minister of Armenia, I've just been to Armenia, has just committed to an ecovillage development program for Armenia, and there's more. So these are the ecovillage development programs. A specific form of them is using schools as the entrance points, and we see these programs especially in Southern Africa, where normally schools are bare school grounds, hungry school children, many malnourished school children. So they might get mice pup in the morning, but they don't get the vitamins, the vegetables and the fruits that they need to actually have truly healthy development. So instead of that, bringing food production back to the schools, bringing rainwater harvesting, soil restoration processes, tree planting back to schools. And then we've spoken about emergencies and refugee, so rebuilding communities after disaster, transforming refugee camps into eco-communities, eco-villages, and we also have the Urban Eco-Neighborhood Program. And I just want to run you through what the Ecovillage Development Program could look like in your country. It's not so difficult. We start with a point of inviting and participating. So we've done baseline studies for 17 countries at the moment, just looking at what are the legal frameworks that are in place in that country that would support this kind of development, what would be needed to support communities and community-led development. And Yvette has been very involved in this, and volunteers worldwide have been part of these studies. We also have we also elicit the information of what is already happening on the ground. Who are the communities that are already involved in this kind of change? Where are the Ecovillage projects, the permaculture projects, etc.? But also, who are the other NGOs locally that are doing like-minded work? We also look at who are those people in government who are supportive. We have the great people in any government, even in the worst government in the world. I don't want to speak about worst governments, but we find great people everywhere. So who are they? Who are the local authorities that are supportive? Where could regional development take place? So we do this exploration. We travel to the countries. We visit the communities. We share inspiration with them from elsewhere in the world. How have other communities worldwide done this? what are the solutions that they implemented? So we involve the communities, and we have a beautiful set of Ecovillage playing cards. Welcome to come and have a look, but we work with visuals and playing cards that we put out in the center of communities, where communities can map their own strengths and their assets and their needs, their weaknesses. What are the points they want to focus on first? What are their leverage points? And you'll remember the 4 dimensions of social, culture, ecology, and economy. So what is important to one community is not the same as another community. While a community here in Europe might need to focus on rebuilding social solidarity because it's been lost, that sense of sharing, and really lowering their ecological footprint, a community in Africa might need to focus on organic food production or renewable energy systems. So it might be different, that leverage point for each community. So the communities decide what is important to them. And then they come together and create their Ecovillage development plan, phase 1. From there on, we reach out with this plan. We go to the local authorities and say, how does this plan fit into your sustainable development plans? How does it fit? How does it fit with the national development plans? Are there other NGOs that are doing exactly the kind of work, that have the expertise in country that this community would need to implement? Are there funding agencies available that would like to support this community and their plans? So there's a lot of support coming from a broad sector alliance towards each community that is involved. And Jen functions as a facilitator, but not more, of that process. And also we always come in with the local facilitators. We have trainers, consultants worldwide that can come in to support. Then the communities themselves implement. And they might say they've decided, we want that water retention landscape. We want to build a dam because we're in a very dry area, but we have lots of rainfalls. I've experienced this in Zambia, where actually the annual rainfall is not at all lower than it was 10, 15 years ago, but still in the past 5 years, thousands of boreholes have dried out. And the water level, the groundwater level, has sunk dramatically. But it's simply because the water is no longer taken in by the soil because of the nakedness of the soil, the deforestation, etc. The water is simply running over the earth into the Zambezi, taking the best topsoil with it and off to the Indian Ocean. This is what's happening worldwide. It's not always that there's less rainfall. So how can we capture that rainfall? So if a community decides this is what we want, they might need outside expertise to come and support them. But we want communities to retain ownership. So we work with the simplest technologies possible that are really effective, but also bringing in experts that really train the communities so that afterwards they can take care of the technologies, of the solar systems, of the wind turbines that they work with. Then we go through a process of measuring and evaluating. The first phase would be, say, a year. So after a year, we'll have a process of measuring and evaluating. We start with a baseline study. We do an Ecovillage impact assessment in all dimensions. How much impact has the community had so far? And we come together to celebrate the outcomes of those first communities that have started in a country. And this can be like in Tanzania. We've had Ecovillage development started in 5 communities. This started 7 years ago, 6 years ago. And each of these communities has experienced great success. Now, around each of the Ecovillages, there's 20, 30, 20 more communities that want to transition to Ecovillages. But also the government of Tanzania has become aware of this and is starting to support the process more and more. So this is how it works. And slowly, from the experience of a few communities, we can spread locally, regionally, nationally to embrace more and more Ecovillages transitioning to Ecovillage. So that's very simple. You see how easy it is. And now we can have a conversation about the more nitty-gritty parts of that process. So we'd love to open the floor to you. And maybe again, just start by turning to maybe the same neighbor, maybe another neighbor, and just share for a few moments what are the questions and the insights that have come up in you during this during these presentations, and what is it that you would like to share in this round, and what are the questions that you would like to have answered. And we'll just spend 2-3 minutes in these small conversations, and then we'll come back with questions and comments from you to us for our last time. So enjoy. Okay, sorry, I just need to, great. So, thank you for these conversations. I know you were just starting out and there's a lot more to say, but I think we'd love to hear from a few of you. So Esther is there with the microphone, and whoever feels ready to share something, please just raise your hands over here. Okay, we start there, and then we can go over to Christer Söderberg over there. Yes?
So I understand that Jen uses a public participatory process that involves a very high level of engagement with the citizens, with them being the decision makers. So I was just wondering what kind of challenges come when the public has so much control over what goes on. So example, like how do you represent like minority interests and like engage the government to support them, or like private firms to support them, or like expertise, yeah.
Who would like to start? I can start, but yeah? Yeah? Well, firstly, I want to say this doesn't mean that we don't acknowledge leadership, yeah? So finding a good balance between having the different voices really well presented and well heard. And I think what Jen is very good in is embracing diversity and building thriving communities. So this really making sure that women's voices are heard, the elders are heard, the children are heard, that's very important. But then we also sit down with the local authorities, because we know that if we don't have their support, development will be so much harder. Wherever we can, we engage very deeply with the local governments, because again, we realize that if we can get the support of government, all the better. Sometimes we work in areas where governments are not necessarily so supportive to their own communities, and then we might choose not to engage so directly. So we have I'll take another principle from the social part of Ecovillage: empower participatory leadership and good governance. So we believe that in Ecovillages, there's more than enough responsibility for everyone to take on leadership. And if somebody really has the responsibility for an area, we also support that leadership. So taking in all the voices, finding a way for all of them to be heard, but then also seeing who is that leader who is able to integrate the voices into a meaningful plan, a meaningful message that is taken forward. And where are the feedback loops that are important every step of the way to make sure that that leader also receives the feedback necessary as we move forward. So it's really a combination of hearing all the voices and also allowing leadership. So especially youth leadership. You know, how many young people have brilliant ideas? So leadership of many, but also working with local leadership structures. I hope that gives you a sense. And some of the challenges are huge. I can just speak, for instance, of the Ecovillage of Kartong in the Gambia, where we had a very, very beautiful process. It's spread now to 11 communities along the coast. We had a wonderful facilitated process, and afterwards, actually some of the leading groups of the government in the Gambia are very involved in sand mining along the coast. So they're involved in the sand mining, which is taking away the dunes with rising sea levels, and community is at immediate threat. So we had the community of Kartong, the Ecovillage, standing up against that and saying we no longer want sand mining in Kartong. 1 week later, 35 of the most active members of the Ecovillage network were arrested and put into prison. And it took quite a social media support system for them also to be freed again. So it's definitely not just easy. You know, when communities start standing up for their rights, we find that people's lives are threatened. So those are some of the challenges when communities are empowered. Sorry, we'll just go over here and then come back to you.
Thank you. And thank you for all you're doing. I've followed Jen for around at least the past 10 years, and I think it's amazing what's being accomplished. So tremendous impact, and I really thank you for that. You mentioned something initially, and I just wanted to make sure I got this straight, but I understood it that if 5% of Europe, if 5% of Europe lived according to the practices of GEN, or Global Ecovillage Networks, then we would accomplish 80% of the Sustainable Development Goals by 2020? Is that more or less?
I said more or less, I said something like that. I'm just going to open it now so I can give you the exact.
Because that's a wonderful and very impactful comment. If I understood it correctly, I think it's very inspiring.
Here. So it's the TESS research project financed by the EU, which concluded that if only 5% of the EU were to engage in effective community-led climate change adaptation initiatives, carbon savings would be sufficient for 85% of the EU's countries to achieve their 2020 emission reduction targets.
I think you put it better, actually, but.
Yes, I know, it's a bit complex, that's why.
Okay, but I think we're on the same line.
But it's the same line.
Yeah,
yes,
thank you.
That's
very empowering, actually.
Yeah, it is.
So that was the
and again,
question.
if you come forward, we can also send through this information.
I would like that. Yes, I would really appreciate that. The other question, or the question I have, is how do you see bioregionalism as related to global ecovillage networks? Do you collaborate with bioregional efforts as well, or how do you see that?
Does somebody else want to answer?
Thank you.
Yeah, well, as you know, that GEN is composed of various regions, no? We have Asia, Oceania, Africa, Latin America, North America, Europe, but there's also this within the region, they have the support system for taking care of their ecosystems together, or even collaborations, like for example in CASA, and their common need now has to do with emergencies, the earthquakes and natural disasters, and so as a network, they created sub-networks to also focus on these issues.
I'm sorry, maybe I wasn't
maybe I can
correct.
just add to this.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I think that there is a natural match between bioregionalism and ecovillages, because you know what I said about the curdling of the yogurt and the milk. We see that this happens within bioregions. So, for instance, you know, to take the example again of Findhorn, this is a 54-year-old ecovillage in the north of Scotland, and measuring the area around Findhorn, scientists have found that it's the area with the highest density of eco-social enterprise initiatives in the UK, which is a bit surprising, because it's really far out in the north in Scotland. You know, there's not a very high economic activity in the north of Scotland, as you might know, and yet this is the area with the highest social enterprise density, just as an example. Another example is the ecovillage of Zeg, which is close to Berlin in the area of Brandenburg, I believe. Sorry, I might get my German geography wrong here, and we have many Germans here, so forgive me. But they're around Belzig, and that whole area has now become a hotbed for community development, but also for local communities that are becoming more sustainable than other communities in that area. So it's something that happens naturally. Also, as I said, in Tanzania, one eco-village starting, and then all the villages around also learning from that and wanting to transition as well. So it's a natural fit. Yeah. Yes. One more.
I was wondering if you could speak to the idea of how ecovillages might address climate adaptation.
So many ecovillages are really practicing regenerative agriculture, ways to prevent disaster risk reduction. Like, for example, the one in Bangladesh I was sharing about. There are ecosystem restoration projects in parts where there's flooding risk, and also where there are drought risks. Yeah, like we said earlier, like in Colombia, the mudslides there. We're also engaging in indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge, because many of these are also able to, I guess it's a more sustainable engaging the solutions, because it's more intuitive to the people. They know they know it well. It's tacit knowing that they can adapt, and as we know, like many indigenous peoples are right at the forefront of climate change. They really live by the forests or the ecosystems which are directly affected. Adaptation in terms of, for example, there's one project in the Solomon Islands that we're starting to engage with, because of the rise in seawater. They're using permaculture practices, you know, and how they can also prepare ahead of time for disasters. Yeah, those are just some of the examples to share. Maybe some other.
Great.
Yeah, like Kosha said in Zimbabwe, the drought being affected, the Greening Schools program is also helping address some drought issues there. So ways to adapt with climate change are also part of our approach.
Yeah, and I think that overall, some of the traditional knowledge, the richness of traditional heritage, cultural heritage, and natural heritage, biodiversity, seed saving, the different the wisdom that is held by indigenous communities around the planet. These are resources and a wealth that goes far beyond what we're treasuring it at. I think this is really our toolkit, you know. So I think this is also where ecovillages are serving as hotbeds for really collecting those traditions, making sure they're not lost, collecting those seeds, regenerating biodiversity. We just heard, for instance, there was a scientific study just of Zeg, the community I just spoke about, which is close to Berlin, measuring the biodiversity within the community surroundings to the biodiversity in the local rural area, agricultural area, and the local town, and how much higher it was. So the biodiversity within the human settlement of the ecovillages was far, far higher than in the natural areas around. I think those kind of aspects are really strong and are an incredibly important part of climate adaptation. Yeah, thank you so much. I think we have to come to the end. I think our time is over for today. We do have more events coming up. We have a very special event this Saturday where we're going to share with several of our close partners different approaches to community-led change. And in the afternoon, we'll have many more people. So by then, hopefully, Sunita from Cameroon and Margarita from Colombia will all have arrived. So you'll get a chance to meet people, many more people from the Gen teams. But also, we're going to play a game with the Ecovillage playing cards in the afternoon, practicing how we as a community would design our pathway into the future. Just a quick taster of how to use the cards, and you're really warmly invited to that. Again, please do come forward and meet Fanny and Esther to put down your emails if you want to receive information, more information about the different brochures. We would actually make an effort to send them out to you by tonight, tomorrow, so you can browse them at your own leisure. We also have a booth just over there. It's number
F2120.
Say again?
F2120.
Oh, F2120. I need to practice that. F2120. And we'd be delighted if you find the time to come around and have a conversation with us. It's been lovely to see all your faces and your interested eyes. I've seen many smiles actually while we've been speaking, so that was heartwarming. And thank you so much for being here for this afternoon. And thank you again to the speakers. Thank you, Yvette. Thank you, Brigitta. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you to the tech team. We stressed them out a little bit at the beginning.
And thank you, Kosha. Thank you for leading us.